Most career changes trying to break into IT project management have never seen a real enterprise IT project from the inside. They've read about it, they've watched videos about them, they've taken courses that describe them in abstract, but they've never actually sat in the room when an executive sponsor demanded a status update at 4 p.m. on a Friday. They've never been on the call when a vendor missed a critical milestone. They've never watched a project burn through its contingency budget in week 4. And so when they walk into an interview and a hiring manager asks, "Tell me what an enterprise IT project actually looks like," they just freeze. Now, if you're interested in becoming a project manager, learning how real IT projects are run, and building actual project management experience, then why not join us inside the Eddy system on School? It's a practical space for people who want to stop just watching project manager content and actually start practicing. There's a community tab for conversations, networking, and real PMO activity, a calendar tab with live phase-gate sessions every Monday and Thursday, and a classroom filled with training, PM tools, and resources to land a job. There's also a simulation platform where students pick realistic IT projects, make decisions, create deliverables, and move their projects forward. On the screen, there's a link, or you can simply click the link in the description of this video, and we'll see you inside. Today, I'm gonna fix that. I'm gonna walk you through a real enterprise IT project, end to end, the way it actually plays out, not the textbook version, the real breakdown. So first, quick context is I've been an IT project manager for over 8+ years. I've worked remotely from Mexico, Colombia, Peru, Argentina, and many other countries. And in a single year, I actually made over $300,000 doing this work. Most of that work has been inside enterprise IT environments like software rollouts, infrastructure migrations, tool consolidations, security and compliance projects, vendor implementations, the kind of project that involves 6 or 7 different stakeholders and vendors, multi-million-dollar budgets, and timelines measured in quarters or years. Today's video is going to give you the inside view of that world, the version that nobody else explains, because most career coaches have never actually been there. So if you're trying to break into project management, specifically IT project management, this is the mental model you need to walk into interviews with. And once you understand how enterprise IT projects actually work, every other piece of the job, the deliverables, the meetings, the conversations, start making a lot more sense. Now, here's the gap, guys, that I want to fix in this video. If you've never worked inside of a large organization, the word project probably means something pretty small to you, like a website launch, a marketing campaign, a move into a new office, things that have a clear start and end date and a manageable scope, and maybe a handful of people involved. But that's not what happens at enterprise level. And the gap between those two mental models is enormous. An enterprise IT project, the kind PMs actually run for a living, typically involves dozens of people across multiple departments, a budget large enough to require executive approval, vendors with their own contracts and SLAs, technology that touches the company's most critical systems, and stakeholders whose interests don't always align. The work isn't harder than what most career changers imagine. It's just much bigger, slower, more political, and more interconnected. And that interconnection is what trips up most new PMs. Every decision you make affects something else. Every conversation has a consequence in 3 other rooms. Every mistake can take weeks to unwind. So if you walk into an interview with a small project mental model, hiring managers can tell within 5 minutes. They've watched it happen too many times. So let me give you the real picture. So we're going to walk through the same project I might walk through in a real interview prep. So phase by phase, person by person, situation by situation. By the end, you'll have a working mental model of how enterprise IT projects actually operate. For this walkthrough, I'm going to use a composite project pulled from a few different enterprise environments that I've worked in. The project will be a customer relationship management platform migration. The company is a mid-sized enterprise company, about 3,000 employees. They've been on a legacy CRM system for a decade, and the system is creaking. Its reporting is slow, integration with new tools is painful, sales leadership has been complaining for 2 years, finance has finally approved a migration to a new platform. The total budget is roughly $4 million across software licenses, implementation services, training, and internal cost. Timeline is around 9 months from kickoff to final cutover. Stakeholders involved: sales, marketing, finance, IT ops, security, customer success, and the executive sponsor. So that's the project in a nutshell. Now let me walk you through what actually happens. So the project starts before it officially starts months before. Sales leadership has been pushing for the migration for 2 years. Finance has been resisting for 1 year because of the cost. IT has been quietly doing the analysis. Procurement has already been talking to 3 different vendors. And eventually somebody, usually a VP, will push a business case to the executive committee and the budget gets approved. That's the moment most career changers think the project begins, but it isn't. It's the moment that somebody officially starts looking for a project manager. And so once you're brought in, your first job is initiation, which can sound kind of technical, but what it actually means is figuring out who's involved, what the goal really is on the project, what you're walking into. The initiation phase typically involves a kickoff with the executive sponsor. That's the senior leader who owns the budget. It involves stakeholder interviews, meeting with each of the major stakeholder groups to understand their priorities, their concerns, and the politics around kind of what's been going on in the company. It also involves drafting a project charter that captures the scope, the objectives, the risks, the success criteria, and it involves getting that charter signed off by the sponsor before a single dollar can be spent. Most career changers underestimate how much of this is political. The technical work is quite straightforward. The political work, figuring out which stakeholders are aligned, which ones are quietly opposing it, and which are going to try to expand the scope of the project for their own reasons, that's the hard part. And it's actually the part senior PMs spend most of their initiation phase on. Initiation usually takes around 2 to 4 weeks. By the end, you should have a signed charter and aligned executive sponsor and a clear-eyed view of where the political risks lie. Now, from initiation, you move into planning. Planning is where most enterprise projects either set themselves up for success or quietly doom themselves. The work in this phase looks kind of like this. You build a detailed project schedule with all the major work streams for our CRM migration. That could mean data migration, system configuration, integration with other tools, security review, user training, cutover planning. Each work stream gets its own lead, sometimes from your team, sometimes from your vendor, sometimes from another department. You build your RAID log, a running list of all the risks and assumptions and issues and dependencies. For a project this size, you'll probably have 30 to 50 open items at any given point in time. You build a RACI matrix, who's responsible for what, who's accountable, who's consulted, who's informed for every major decision and deliverable on the project. And for a $4 million project, the RACI determines how arguments get resolved. So it's very key that you have that in place. People will inevitably ask for the RACI during times of conflict to be able to resolve conflicts and see who's responsible and accountable for what. You build a stakeholder communication plan, who needs what information, how often, in what format. Some stakeholders want weekly emails, others want monthly steering committee meetings. Some only want to be told when something breaks. And then you also build a budget tracker in this phase, line by line. Where is this money going? Where is the contingency, and how you'll know when you're heading into trouble. Most career changers think that planning can take a week. In a real enterprise environment, planning can take 6 to 8 weeks. And that's not bloat. That's the work it actually requires to align 20 different people around a $4 million initiative. By the end of planning, you should have a kickoff scheduled with the entire team, a baseline schedule everyone has signed off on, and a budget the finance team is comfortable with. From there, we move into execution, which is the longest phase. Typically for our CRM integration project is 6 months. For larger projects, it can be years. This is where the project actually happens. Your role during execution is just to manage the work without actually doing it yourself. You're not configuring the CRM. You're not migrating the data. You're not running the security review. You're managing the people who do those things. A typical week in execution could look something like this. Monday, project leadership, team stand-up. Tuesday, vendor weekly check-in. Wednesday, work stream lead one-on-ones. Thursday, stakeholder steering committee meeting. And then Friday, a status report goes out, maybe with a team retrospective. And in between those meetings, you're doing the real work of project management, which is reviewing the RAID log and chasing items that have been open for too long, updating the schedule when something slips, negotiating between stakeholders who disagree about priorities, escalating to the sponsor when something requires their input, approving change requests, or proposing them, and then reviewing the budget burn against the forecast, documenting decisions. And most weeks during execution, something will go wrong. That's normal. Like a vendor misses a milestone, or a stakeholder will demand a scope change, or a risk you flagged in week 3 will finally materialize in week 10. A team member might quit. And so these risks will arise and turn into issues. And your job isn't to prevent every one of those things. It's to keep the project moving when they happen. The PMs who succeed in execution are the ones who stay calm, communicate clearly, and never let problems compound. The PM who struggles are the one who try to solve everything, themselves. They hide bad news from stakeholders or freeze when something unexpected happens. And so that's the difference between a junior PM and a senior PM. And it's almost entirely a function of how many execution cycles you've been through, which is exactly why hiring managers rate experience so heavily for these roles. Now, while you're in execution, monitoring and controlling runs in parallel. It's not a separate phase in time. It's a separate function in attention. The basic question is, how do you know whether the project is actually on track? And you answer that question through a structured set of mechanisms. You compare actual progress against the baseline schedule. You compare actual budget burn against the planned curve, and you track the RAID log for new and aging items. You track stakeholder sentiment, usually informally, by paying attention to what they're saying. You watch for early signs of trouble, and early signs of trouble, examples for our CRM migration project could be vendor estimates start growing longer between weekly calls, or two stakeholders who used to attend steering committee meetings start sending delegates. The data migration workstream lead asks for an exception meeting. A scope change request comes in that wasn't in the original sponsor briefing. Each one of those is a signal that something could be going sideways. Senior PMs catch them in week 2 and act quickly. Junior PMs miss them until week 8, and when the signal has become a crisis. The artifact you produce out of monitoring and controlling a project is the weekly status report. For an enterprise project of this scale, that's a 1 or 2 page document sent to the steering committee every Friday that captures things like the schedule status, the budget status, top 3 risks, and decisions needed from leadership and any escalations. That document is probably the most important thing that you produce as a PM. It's a historical record. It's the early warning system. It's the artifact that senior leaders read when they want to know whether you're competent or not. Get good at writing a status report. Now, when you've executed the project and you're ready to move into closure, closeout is the phase that most projects do badly. Now, when you're done with execution and ready to move into closure, when the cutover happens or when the new CRM goes live, the old system is decommissioned and users start operating on the new platform, there's a temptation to declare victory and just move on. Don't do that. Real closeouts involve a few specific things. So you run a hypercare period of usually 2 to 4 weeks of intensive support to catch issues that show up in production. You document lessons learned through a structured retrospective with the team. You hand off operational ownership to the team that will run the system long term. You finalize the budget. You close out the vendor invoices. You return any unspent contingency, and you document final spend. And you write a project closeout report for the sponsor. Most career changers don't realize how much organizational learning happens or fails to happen in closeout. The companies that close projects properly compound lessons learned over years. The companies that don't make the same mistakes on every project for a decade. As a PM, your last act on a project is to make sure that the next PM who runs something similar has access to what you've learned. And that's the part that nobody teaches in courses. It's the part that senior PMs do almost reflexively. Now, I'd like to just quickly name the roles that you'll encounter on a project like this. So the executive sponsor owns the budget and the political cover. They're the person that you go to when a decision needs to be made above your pay grade. You meet with them typically or roughly once a month for formal updates, and probably more often informally. The steering committee is a group of senior leaders, usually one from each major stakeholder department, who meet monthly to review progress and resolve any cross-functional issues. You run that meeting. The vendor project manager is your counterpart on the implementation partner side. You'll spend more time with this person than almost anyone else on the project. The relationship matters a lot. Workstream leads run the individual pieces of the project, like the data migration, the configuration, the integration, the training, and they report to you kind of indirectly for project purposes, but still report to their own managers for performance for their regular job. This dual reporting is one of the trickiest dynamics in an enterprise PM work. Business analysts translate business requirements into technical specs. On a CRM migration, they're crucial. On smaller projects, they may be embedded in your team. End users are the people who will actually use the system once it's live. You don't typically work with them directly during execution, but you'll work closely with them, with their managers and a few representatives during requirements gathering and training. The security and compliance reviewers will review your project at multiple gates. Get them involved early. They can kill a launch in week 8. if you didn't plan for them in week one. Internal IT operation will own the system after cutover, so get them involved during execution. Their input shapes what done actually means. So each of these groups that I've mentioned here have different priorities, different communication preferences, and different definitions of success. Your job is to keep them aligned without becoming anyone group's enemy. Here are a few things that can go wrong on almost every enterprise IT project. If you can recognize them in interviews, you'll sound experienced even if you've only seen them through this video. One is scope creep. Stakeholders ask for a small addition throughout execution. Each one looks reasonable in isolation. Together, they push the project 6 weeks past schedule. The senior PM move is to handle scope change through a formal change request process, not in hallway conversations. Vendor estimation. So implementation vendors almost always underestimate effort during the sales cycle. By month 3, the vendor is asking for additional time or budget. The senior PM move is to build contingency into the schedule and budget and to push back on vendor estimates during planning. Stakeholder fade. So the executive sponsor is fully engaged at kickoff. By month 4, they're missing meetings. By month 6, they're missing decisions and the project starts to drift. The senior PM move is to maintain the sponsor relationship deliberately. Short, structured updates that take their time efficiently. The senior PM move is to maintain the sponsor relationship deliberately through short and structured updates to the sponsor. Integration surprises. The CRR migration touches half a dozen other systems. At least one of those integrations turns out to be much harder than anyone estimated. The senior PM move is to surface integration risks early on, allocate explicit time and budget to them early on, and build relationships with the teams that own that system early on so that you can avoid any surprises later on. Now, the last one to watch for is cutover chaos. The technical work is done, the new system is configured, then the cutover weekend arrives and 100 small issues nobody predicted show up. The senior PM move is to plan cutover like a separate mini project with its own runbook, its own contingency, and its own communication plan. Each of these patterns has played out on every enterprise IT project that I've ever run. Knowing they're coming makes you significantly better at the job. Here's a quick story for you guys just to illustrate this in visually for you. A few years back, I was 3 months into a software rollout very similar to the one I just walked you guys through. Everything looked fine on paper. Schedule was green, budget was still on track, stakeholders seemed engaged. And then in a routine vendor check-in on a Wednesday, the vendor PM made a small comment, just an aside about how their lead developer had taken on an extra project at another client. And I made a note in the raid log and moved on. And then next week, the vendor missed a minor deliverable. The week after, they missed the bigger one. And by week 6, the entire data migration work stream was 3 weeks behind. And so by the time I escalated to the steering committee, the project was looking at a real timeline slip. And so the lesson I took away from that was, and the one I'd give any new PM watching this is that the early warning signs are almost always small. They look like offhand comments. They feel like they don't matter. The senior PM move is to take them seriously even when they look like nothing, especially when they look like nothing. It's when you need to kind of pay more attention to what this could turn out to be. So there you have it. That's an enterprise IT project from end to end: initiation, planning, execution, monitoring, and closure. We talked about stakeholder pitfalls. We talked about, I've kind of shown you the whole picture here. Now, if you walk into an interview with this mental model, even if you've never actually run a project this size yourself, you'll sound dramatically more credible than 90% of candidates you'll be competing against. Hiring managers can hear the difference between someone who's read about projects and someone who can describe them properly. If you want to actually run real project work like this with real stakeholders, real ceremonies, real artifacts that go into your portfolio, that's what I built my live PMO for. We run projects very similar in shape to the one I just kind of walked you guys through. A link is in the description below, and I'd love to see you inside our live PMO environment. Drop a comment on what part of this video most surprised you. I want to know if this has helped you in some way. And so if nothing else, I will see you guys on the next one.